Hey everyone, welcome back to Astro Alchemy. I'm Sarah and I am here with Lora as per usual, and we're here to talk to you about the gate and or gene key that the sun is currently moving through. Today it is Wednesday, December 7th. It's 2:21 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 11:21 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is kind of a spicy week, and I only say that because today is the day of the full moon, and the full moon this week is conjoined with Mars, which is also retrograde in Gemini, and so we're going to be covering that as well as Gene Key and Gate 5 from Human Design. So we have a lot to talk about. I'm excited to jump in. Lora, is there anything that you want to add at the beginning?
If we're your cup of tea, feel free to like and subscribe and stick around for more weekly episodes of us. And it's a Jack of Clubs day in cardology, so it's a fun, eclectic energy, right? Jack of Clubs, I said that right.
Yeah, eclectic's a good word. I think so. For it, I think the Jack of Clubs is like all jacks tend to be like fun and playful, but specifically the Jack of Clubs has a lot going on, so it can feel like, you know, there's 100 different things happening all at once when we have the Jack of Clubs. So maybe in a fun and playful way, like not in like a super regimented way, in a kind of like shocking and surprising way. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a juggler. And yeah, we're back into club season after being in heart season at the end of November. So, you know.
A very brief diamond season at the beginning of December.
Yeah, we did have a very brief diamond season at the beginning of December that only lasted for 4 days. And then, you know, in January, we're going to go right back into a really spades and diamonds heavy time of year. So we'll keep you updated on those things and just briefly touch on them so you can start to tap into the energy. It's not the only system that we look at. I also look at the Mayan Cosmovision. Lora also looks at tarot. We look at other things too.
Tarot isn't really for like timing though. It's more for divination.
It's not really.
It's not a calendar.
Yeah. But there are some correlations between tarot and astrology.
Oh, yeah.
And basically like all things divination, like will occasionally pop up here. If you stick around for enough episodes, you'll hear us. So yeah, as Laura said, if you like what we're talking about, especially insofar as astrology, human design, and gene keys, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and yeah, we would love to hear from you in any way if you're on your fractal.
Share this with a friend. Also, thank you to the 0 people that told me happy birthday. Very rude of you. Like, I'm a human being. It's a YouTube channel, sure, yeah, but there's like people here, me and Sarah. So thank you, no thank you. Sorry, not sorry, however it goes. But on that note, here's the genetic matrix chart of the moment. As Sarah said, we're in gate 5, which is my moon. To talk about myself for a second, hold on. It's my design moon in line 5. So this is an energy I'm rather familiar with. So the sun is in gate 5, line 5, color 4. Earth is in 35.5, and Mars is also in, no, Mars is in 35, but line 6. Tomorrow, the sun, no, the Earth and Mars will be conjunct, both in line 6. But Neptune's in 36, Mars is here in 35. So we have a channel connecting the throat to the emotional solar plexus, not just this week because Mars is still there. It's going to be ongoing. Actually, I did not look up when that will last. 1 second, please. For how long will Mars be? Do you know for how long Mars will be in this gate, Sarah?
Oh, I do not know. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're in December until December 22nd. So we have some more time of this channel present, 35, 36. It's not just this week, though we feel the sun and the earth strongest. So that's why it's like super duper intense this week. And then it's going to dissipate, but that energy will still be present. But 5 is over here in the sacral center. And 5 is part of logical circuitry, whereas 35 of the earth is in abstract circuitry, both collective, but the two different halves of collective. 5 is in logical. And it is one of the pentachannels. So many things to talk about. It is one of the pentachannels that are located between the sacral to the G to the throat. It's part of the channel of something. I'm very bad at memorizing channel names, as you know, from listening to these episodes endlessly. 515. 15 is the gate of extremes. 5 is the gate of flow, the gate of waiting, the gate of fixing rhythms. So let's just scooch on over and read this little blurb for a second. Waiting as an active state of awareness through the fundamental attunement to natural rhythms, the gate of fixing rhythms, with joy being the 5th line, waiting as an aspect of enlightenment. And enlightenment is one of the words within the line companion that's used very sparingly, so it's interesting that it comes up here. Venus exalted, to remain calm as the ultimate aesthetic and thus recognize the inner meaning of being, the power to be calm and to find one's place in the flow. Pluto in detriment, joy dismissed as an illusion. Pluto was here. What year was it?
It was like 2002 to 2000. It was like somewhere in the early 2000s, like 2000 to 2002 or something.
Yeah, so a vast generation of people now, Gen Z, have this placement in detriment. Not that that's a bad thing if you're a Gen Z listening, but Pluto in detriment, joy dismissed as an illusion, waiting as a failure, disillusionment with recognizing one's place in the flow. There's so many places where I could go. So this gate in the human design perspective is all about being part of, like, fixed in the natural rhythms of life. It's a gate that is in not just the human design body graph, but mammalian body graphs, insect body graphs, birds, reptilian body graphs, pentas, Ys, though for the Y, it's just really part of the penta, and a Y is made up of various pentas. And it's in every single cell. Like every cell, I'm pretty sure, is just 5, 15, and 3. So all of your cells of your body have either a fixed energy with 5 or like the receptors of 5. So you think like your body has its main body graph that was programmed from the day of your birth, but like all your individual cells are constantly reproducing, excuse me, and multiplying, and in that they are, getting reprogrammed, right? So 5 is like a fundamental building block of life. It's like the mitochondria of human design, fundamental building block. Like everyone remembers from biology, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's like ingrained deeply into our minds. But 515 is an energy a channel that deals with finding flow in extremes. 15 is like the love of all extremes. And 5 is the generative force. It's a sacral gate. It creates energy, it generates patterns. Is that it? No, I took notes. Aha, I found my notes. I was disappointed. Like I actually took notes this week and then I lost them before we started recording. And I was like, no, I'm gonna have to remember everything by heart. But I found my notes. They were in my human design book. But it's a generative energy that generates patterns. And so with this gate, there is a quality of having your own natural patterns, whether you generate them yourself or whether they're fixed. And it can be that my brain's like not forming coherent thoughts. Let me ground down. Logical circuitry is about pattern recognition, right? When we look at logical patterns, we're looking what we can repeat. Last week, we talked about gate 9, which is the life force to implement the patterns, to put energy into the details of the patterns. And then this energy goes through the sacral, through the 5 to find the flow with the patterns, to be able to repeat the patterns in its own natural state of timing. And so, our entire world is like built upon the logical process. It's like the mitochondria of the cell. It's the fundamental way in which we survive. Like, yes, we all have our individual mutations and our abstractions and this and that, our tribal energy, but for everything to survive and continue existing within the world, like we have this logical process that repeats things that we can trust, like mathematics. It's very like, you trust that 1 + 1 will always equal 2. There's like this trust and sturdiness in logic. And so 5 is this generative force that fuels it so that we can continue with these logical processes. But yeah, so 5, I feel like my brain was, yesterday was an intense day for conversations. And so like, just my brain hasn't fully recovered from yesterday, and it's frantic. Right-mindedness.
I mean, also just the full moon energy is a lot. So
that too. Where do I want to go with my thoughts? I just like talking about gene keys, but actually no. Okay, so I have gate 5, line 5, right? This aesthetic to remain calm is the ultimate aesthetic. When it comes to human design and having this gate in your body graph, you are someone that has your natural rituals and rhythms and patterns that are correct for you, whether your sacral center is defined or undefined. If you're defined, you create those rhythms and patterns in your life that may affect everyone around you or not. If you have it undefined like me, you have your own rhythms and patterns, but you don't know when enough is enough. And so you can get caught up in patterns that are unhealthy and not know when to stop them or when they need to shift or change. Gate 5, because it's like part of this fundamental building block of life, it's very tied into like the seasons and the shifting of nature and how there's this flow that exists all around us, whether we're attuned to it or not. But line 5, if you read the line companion, is about, like Ra talks about within all of the lines of gate 5, the story of there's a person in an apartment, and they have their fixed rhythms of like how they operate their day-to-day life. Like, oh, they drink coffee at the same time, they do this at the same time, they do that at the same time every day. And like no one can deter them from their natural patterns and rhythms. And then the apartment catches fire. So what to do? What do they do when something comes in and tries to disturb their inner natural rhythm? And I say that because this is me. When I was in high school, my house caught fire. And I was like, I could not be bothered. I remained calm as the ultimate aesthetic to recognize the inner meaning of being. I was like, nope, like leave me alone. I don't care that the house is on fire. I'm sleeping right now. Do not disturb my sleep. Just leave me alone. And so I totally resonate with this particular line of this gate. But in a nutshell, it is the sacral energy, the life force that creates patterns. And with this, if you have gate 5, it's one of the crosses of gate 5, or the cross of consciousness. Is it listed here? The others: cross of consciousness, cross of habits, cross of separation. With having this like as part of your cross, there's an innate part of you that needs to have its rituals. And if you try to mess with your own rhythms too much, or if you get caught up in the wrong rhythms, then it can be very unhealthy for you and your own life force. And so you think about the life around us, like I said, logic builds everything. And in that, this gate 5 builds up everything with the extremes. And so in our collective, we have built-in patterns that we have accepted as correct. You go to work from 9 to 5, you do this, you do that, we have these collective we're like a hive of bees buzzing, and everyone has their place in the grand scheme of things. And in that, there is like the natural hum of existence, and that hum may or may not be correct for you. And so just because there's this logical buzz that happens, this flow of life, doesn't mean that that's your own personal flow of life. And you have to use your own strategy and authority to determine whether or not it's correct for you to maintain that buzz of whatever it is, that the flow that you get caught into. It's like a very strong current in a river. Like you get sucked in and it pulls you wherever it's taking you. And there's like similar to gate 9, a grand active willpower that's needed to pull you out of that flow when it's actually incorrect. Something that I think is really fascinating, like if we're looking at the architecture of life, and like I said, cells all have gate 5, whether it's defined or undefined, mammals, reptiles, humans. Plants are different. Plants have 15, but they don't have access to 5. And, we think about gate 5, especially in like the shadow chapter of the Gene Keys book. Richard talks about like plants or nature and the seasons and things. And so you would think, oh yeah, just like a bear knows to hibernate into winter, a plant knows to drop its leaves in the fall. And yet that plant is subject to its external conditions. It doesn't have its own rhythm in which it, internally adapts or finds its flow in the now to do whatever it needs to do. It is responsive to the external extremes that it's dependent upon. And in that, there's like a huge relationship between plants and all other life force on the planet, because we're all dependent on all the plants to survive. And so we have 5, and the plants don't. They have their 15. And so we connect with them. And there's this magical relationship that we have with our plant allies that exists within this channel. So it's a really nice energy. In terms of electromagnetics, like if you're a person that has both 5 and 15, you have your own extremes and you have your flow that operates within those extremes. However, if you have 5 and not 15 and you come across someone with 15, even though it's an electromagnetic channel and there might be that click in that you feel with that person, these two energies are like some that don't get along great together, because 5 has their own flow and 15 has their own extremes. And though that flow and those extremes might clash energetically. And so it's a more tricky electromagnetic channel to have with another person because of the way these two gates operate. So that's interesting to note. I feel like there's other stuff I want to mention from the human design side, but again, my brain is not very happy today. So Sarah, anything else you want to mention about 5?
I mean, I think you did a really good job of covering a lot of bases about 5.
I did a good job. I think I did a very poor job this week.
Compared to, well, you can keep that to yourself because compared to how much I know about 5, at least from the human design perspective, that was a lot of like added information. I mean, I think something that's interesting about the 5 and 15, and then the gate the channel is right next to it, 214, which is the beat, is like there's this like kind of like musical quality to this channel and the 214, where like there's rhythm and beat, and they both are moving from the sacral to the G center. So I don't know, I thought that was something as far as like experientially, like what's been going on with 5, like the quality of patience, and we're going to talk about it more with the gene keys, but the way like I've been feeling it has been very almost choppy, like where there's these moments I'm getting where I feel like I'm in my little like ritual bubble, and then there's moments where like I feel myself trying to push instead of just like letting whatever it is that I'm doing just like have a life of its own in a sense. So we can talk about it more for the gene keys, but that's kind of it. I think something important to note too is just that like the 35-36 is going to be active for a while, and that's a manifesting channel. And so we have manifesting energy that's coming out collectively, which for me, like I think is very nice, because I have more access to it's one of my bridge gates. It's one of the gates that bridge my split. So I feel like I've been able to speak my mind in ways that are more coherent and cohesive, and the Mars retrograde is going to be moving through it. So even when the sun moves out of, or I'm sorry, the Earth moves out of the 35, Mars will still be there, kind of continuing on with this, at least one part of this this energy. So that's something just like interesting, like a longer term. What day did you say that it moves out of the 36?
The 22nd.
Okay, so the 22nd, and it'll go back into the 30, or I'm sorry, the 35. It'll go back into the 35 too. So just all stuff to, I guess pay attention and watch for, because we're always looking at like the longer moving transits and how they have like again, like an experiential effect on the way that we're feeling and the way that our energy comes through. Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, because, we get in human design really caught into the whole strategy and authority. And one size fits all. Like, it's not to say that, like, we're still constantly being conditioned by the planets, and we're still constantly, of course, being conditioned by other people. And this is maybe more especially true for reflectors and projectors, but there's always energy that's moving through us that slightly modifies like our natural states. And so, you know, sometimes there's this quality of a transit being the thing that causes you to do something that your body to do something that like moves the plot forward, that like, you know, your just strictly design sun or design and personality chart like might not suggest that you would do. So I've just been thinking a lot about that lately, especially when I specifically have a transit that bridges my split and turns me into a manifester instead of a split definition projector. So other than that, I think we can move on to gene keys, unless you want to add your addendums to what I just said.
Yeah, I do. Always and forever have those addendums. Usually, not always and forever, but in terms of what you were saying with strategy and authority, and noticing that, you know, you can't turn off the transits and you can't turn off conditioning from other people. When we sleep, we're being conditioned. When we sleep, we have mammalian bodies. We're not 9-centered. We go to being, I think, 5-centered. And mammalian bodies are conditioned differently than humans. Humans, because our vertical, we receive the neutrino stream coming up through our head center going down, and mammalian bodies receive it differently because they're horizontal. And so they're more, I believe, more conditioned by the human populace, like everyone else on the planet, each other, rather than a combination of the neutrinos coming from above and each other. And so when we're asleep, we're being conditioned by, you know, every single human being on the planet for the most part, the collective force. And so you can't ever turn off conditioning. You think you can when you sleep, but we can't ever turn off. So we're always being impacted, like Sarah said, by the different energies. And then it alters our natural state. And it's important not to identify it. Like, yes, like notice it, experience it, but don't identify it. Don't create a story in your head saying, oh, this is happening for me, and so I can do this now because they have this energy, because you don't know how it's going to show up. It's always different and it's always moving and changing. And you can only really rely on what you have consistent within you to show up in a way that you can recognize and, you know, see the patterns, the logical patterns repeating within you. But when it comes to transits or conditioning from other people, there's so many nuances. I don't know how many, there's like 42,000 something different possible combinations of like how a gate can be defined based on like the planet and the base and the color and the tone and everything else. Like there's so many different options that it's important not to identify, says the person with the cross of identification, but don't identify. But yeah, like Sarah said, 35, 36, it's giving us, if you're not, well, Sarah's emotionally defined, but if you're not emotionally defined, you're getting emotional definition right now. So be aware of your emotional energy. And if it's amplified, know that it's temporary and it won't be there forever. I wanted to share quickly, actually, the other lines of gate 5 that I had open, and then it disappeared. There we go. So pause the screen if you feel so inclined, but here are all the thematics for gate 5. Sarah's reading them, so I'll pause and wait for her to finish.
No, I'm just looking, but you can move because I already read through them myself.
Okay.
Of course, my mind doesn't hold on to the details of any of it, so it's not like I could tell you what I read. But yeah, I think that's a good thing to say. It goes back to the idea, like, you know, as much as we want to be able to control things, it's like you can't really get too strategic about anything. Like you can't. And that's why, you know, I guess it's more to say that, you know, there's specific definition that you can rely upon, but in another way, it's like, you know, if you're doing something that your body's doing something that seems like outside of what you normally do, but it feels correct anyway, like also don't judge yourself for that. Or don't like immediately be like, this is incorrect, this is not self. It's like, well, like, who's to say it is exactly, except for your mind to say that it's not self. So So it's a huge exercise in surrender, not just human design, but the gene keys too, which I guess is probably a good way to segue us into gene keys.
Yeah, I have a lot of quotes for this one, a lot, so I have lots to say. But Jing Key, again, it's my attraction field because it's my design moon, and it has the shadow of impatience, the gift of patience, and the city of timelessness, with the theme being the ending of time. It's part of the code on Ring of Light, which again, like for me, I have my design moon, my personality sun, and my 2 nodes, north nodes. So I'm very strongly identified with this code on Ring of Light. The hexagram is waiting, water over heaven. The programming partner, which is interesting also to think about, that 35 is hunger, adventure, and boundlessness. And the 2 shadow sides of the reactive and repressive are pessimistic and pushy. Pessimistic being repressive, reactive being pushy. So I'll leave that while I start talking in case you want to continue reading it. So impatience. I mean, within this chapter for the shadow, Richard talks about how 5 connects to like the living life force, all of life, because it is this building block, the mitochondria, that is part of all animation, all animate entities, apart from plants, but they have it differently because they have 15 but not 5. And so there's this huge governing force. Actually, something I wanted to say, going back to human design for a second, is like, it's interesting, you think about flow, you think about being at ease in one's flow and having that rhythm. You would think that's abstract, right? Oh yeah, you got your flow, it's flowy, it's not hard or rigid, and yet it's logical. Like logic has these patterns, and it's these patterns, the repetition of these patterns, that create the sensation of flow and movement. So it's interesting to think about in that sense. But I'm just going to read all these quotes. At the deepest level, at the very precipice of awareness, lie the most ancient human fears, and this 5th shadow represents them. These ancient collective fears stem from our one prime source, the fear that there is no underlying order to the universe. Because there's, like I said, trust. Part of this gene key is trust in the universal timing that exists and permeates everything. And when you tend to be impatient and not trust in divine timing, then you lose your faith in like all of, not even humanity, all of existence. Sometimes when you get really dark and heavy. But within the 5th gene key lies the great secret of timing of life. This gene key is about trusting or not trusting universal rhythm and natural timing. It sets the rhythms of the seasons. It fixes the timing of all cell growth and decay in every living creature, and it governs all patterns of animal and human migration. So that just continues that stream of thought. Because the 5th gene key connects all life forms into a wider pattern, you have to learn to realize that nothing happens by chance. Everything is connected to everything else. So when you find yourself moving through a difficult period, it means that all life is moving through a difficult period. And I agree with this statement. So when I started, communicating to the collective about astrology, I would notice that I would pick up on certain energies. I would notice quote unquote glitches in the pattern of like, it's not the standard of how we've been feeling day in, day out. And a little mutation will happen and I'll notice it. And it was just a reflection of the collective in the end. Like I would have a little piece of it, but I would talk about it, and then everyone else that I talked to would relate, because like we have this timing, we have this planetary flow in the cosmos. Like the planets have their rhythms, they have their gate 5 energy of how they move through their orbits. And so there is this universal flow, and within it there are natural ups and downs that are a consequence of that. And if it affects one person, we're all part of a greater collective, so it affects us all. It's like there's this feeling like you're not alone, that you're in your ups and downs, and if you are feeling down, it's because there is something bigger than you happening, and you don't have to identify with it, and you don't have to take it personally. In summary, this 5th shadow of impatience is nothing more than a low frequency human response to a particular set of environmental conditions, much like our plant friends. So, right, like you have a plant in your house, it's dependent on you to survive. It's dependent on its external conditions. You put a plant outside, okay, it's dependent on Mother Nature to survive. But if you have a plant in your house, like if you don't water it, it will die. Just like we have this energy of being dependent on, the external conditions, and they also nurture us. But Like all the shadows, it's simply a matter of perception and attitude. Time always moves according to your perception or mood. And then I have quotes also for the repressive and reactive. Sarah, is there anything you want to say about the shadow?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, one of the first things he says is just that if the frequency of your genetics is tuned into the fear, which is the fear that there's no underlying order, no matter what you do to try to bring a sense of stability in your life, your body itself will never feel safe. And I think this is so important for, those of us who are, in the deconditioning process, for one, on the human design side, but then just like also people in general, like no matter, this is why like we deal with situations where we like, it's almost like whack-a-mole, where you like deal with one set of fears in the material world, but then another set of fears immediately come up and they like change shape and move to something else, because the fears are inside your body. And until you can understand like that you're ultimately held, like your body, and I don't even mean understand it in a mental way, because logically we can understand it, which is basically where I'm at. But like if we can't actually embody the fact that we know that we're held, if we can't really just like integrate it into the cells of our physical selves, there's no way to really free yourself of the fear. And you're always going to have to deal with fear in one way, shape, or form. It's just a matter of like, is the fear going to be the thing that is the more overarching control mechanism for the way that you live your life, or isn't it? And if we're mostly afraid and we're mostly making decisions from that fear and not from our correctness, then most of our lives are being lived as not self. And so it has to do, like the fifth key has to do with this like embodied fear that's like running the show in a sense, and that we can't just explain our ways out of in our mental processes. And I relate to that so much, because so much of my work now, after doing a lot of like the mental health work and the talk therapy work and the working through different patterns that I had in my thoughts, like I realized there's a lot that needs to be released within my body too, in order to get me to a place where I can actually tap into or tune into like my own internalized rhythm. So that was the one thing. And then the other thing that I had just noted was that, right before he talks about the repressive and reactive nature, he says that the fifth gene key contains the most beautiful of equations, and that's acceptance equals patience, because the deeper you enter into your fears, the more patient you become. And this is where, that I was like, wow, this is such an important lesson for everybody to understand and to learn, because, when we're in fear, what our tendency to do is to become very reactionary. Like, I need to do this in order to quell my fear. I need to do that in order to quell my fear. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to do this. I need to do that. And it's just like an ongoing process of like doing things that you think are helping, but like realistically likely are taking you out of your own rhythm. And so like the patience is like the longer you sit with whatever fear is kind of quelling up within you, the more basically the more you accept them, the more able you are to accept them, and the more like the more aware you become of the fact that they actually don't have any real hold over you, that you're creating these like stories in your own head. And I've actually experienced that. Like, I'm not, again, far away from from what we'll talk about as the city, but there's this quality of like, you start out super reactionary, trying to band-aid every single thing that comes up. Like, I'm afraid of all this stuff. And then as you get more and more patient and less reactionary, you realize that the more you sit with it, the less urgent it becomes, and the more you see it for just a passing feeling. So that's what I had outlined about the shadow before the repressive and reactive, but I'll let you go ahead with those two.
The Pessimism is the repressive. And so it's just, you stop trusting in the patterns and the life force. And so you think nothing is working in your favor, and you just take on this attitude that, everything's horrible in life. But pessimism pulls one into a downward spiral, feeding on itself over and over until it finally ends in a crisis or some kind of psychological and or nervous collapse. If a person has been swept into pessimism, there's nothing proactive they can do to break free. As their friend or an observer, you must trust that life will create a crisis for them, and because eventually it will. So it's this idea that, like, when you get so pulled into this energy, the only thing to do is trust that the flow of life will course correct this person or you into something else when you are stuck in this negative state of mind that's perpetuating, the pessimism and the mistrust and the impatience. And for pushy, these people tend to manifest very inharmonious situations where natural timing is out of synchronization and nothing seems easy, as though life were deliberately blocking one's path. Even so, these kinds of natures stubbornly push on, making the situation worse and worse until something or someone has to snap in order to release the pressure. So it's like trying to push against the natural flow of life and thinking that you can change things. And I feel like this is very pertinent to the human design experiment. It's an experiment, therefore it's logical. You enter into your experiment. 3 types are meant to be responsive, and that response requires waiting. Whether you're a reflector, generator, manifesting generator, or a projector, like, only manifestors can initiate. And so a vast majority of the population is here to wait. And then waiting, the patience doesn't inherently mean waiting. You can wait patiently or impatiently. And then if you're waiting for something external to shift so that you can respond to it, or you can wait for that recognition and invitation, and nothing's happening, you can become very distrustful of the experiment and of the benefit of following strategy and authority. And so I feel like this Ching key is very tied into the logical process of human design. Because you enter into experiment and you think there's something you're supposed to do. Like, if you're told to wait, you're like, okay, but what do I do while I'm waiting? What do I do? And the key is finding that flow of, like, what your energy wants to do, what your body wants to do in the downtime, without your mind trying to interfere and tell you, okay, do this, do that, do that, do that. And we can become very distrustful of the experiment and the validity of it in the beginning, because nothing's happening. And I was having a conversation, I guess this ties into the city a little bit, but I was having a conversation with a new friend yesterday, and something that came up was the theme of timelessness, or time, and no choice. And is it okay? Is this tangent okay? Can I go into this? It might be a long tangent.
I don't know. Is it? Because it depends on, because I do have some things to say about the repressive and reactive nature. So
okay, go for it. Go for it. I'll wait until we get into timelessness.
Okay. So yeah, just the couple things that you were talking about, definitely, as far as the reactive and repressive nature, definitely resonated. And I think it's interesting because when you see people that are out of rhythm, especially on the pessimistic side, it's like the only thing that's going to take them and make them see something is like a crisis. And the same thing goes for people who are trying to force the flow of life on the pushy side. And so, like, having that crisis quality, and like that being like what is the only teacher, it's like you yourself, if you're watching somebody else inhabit the shadow, like, you have to be patient and not reactive and trying to, like, fix other people's lives too, because that life is gonna, if they're depressed, if they're pushy, if they're trying to create flow. The other thing that I think is really important, for me specifically, I was raised by a not self. Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you to do that. Thank you. I was raised by a not self projector who, like, thought she was a manifestor basically. And so was, like, consistently trying to initiate things. And so she was very pushy, and, like, you teach that to your children to not trust the flow of life in a sense. And so, like, I lived most of my life where it's almost like, it's like the ego or the not self's, like, tendency to think that you're in control, when, like, realistically, like, you're just, like, creating chaos, and, like, you haven't actually seen that there's a grand design that's, like, holding you. And so the more you push, the less you're able to see the architecture. And so you like can live in this pushiness for basically as long as life allows you, until something comes up that's like a big pattern disruptor. And so I just think that, pattern disruptor has been something that I'm, starting to recognize myself as, like, my energy is that of someone who does that. And like this particular key has the quality of, if you are in, it's self-corrective. If you're in either of these, like there's going to be something that happens to you that's a pattern disruptor. And like most of us want to like live in this like controlled, comfortable place. Nobody wants to be called out. A lot of people like staying status quo. A lot of people like things not changing because it's what's comfortable. It's what they know. And, what a lot of times is required. And if you carry the energy of a pattern disruptor yourself, is like sometimes you have to rock the boat, and it's not because you're doing it like I'm out of ego. It's like, this is just who I am. Like, I'm here to say things that like are going to make you question some of the basic dynamics that you've been living, like the premises that you've been living your life under. And I think even too, like, just to circle back about the manifestor thing that you were saying, like even manifestors, even though they can initiate, they still have to wait for the universal force to basically like, enter them and be like, okay, it's time to initiate. So, there's always a sense of waiting. And I've seen manifestors who are in their not self, like just being like really crazy because like they've got nothing to do or nothing going on. And so they try and like get their hands in stuff that aren't like ready for them. So, or like that they're not really that into, you know what I mean? So waiting is just like, is a part of something that we all need to do. And it's like almost everyone lives in a state of not waiting. At least that's how I've seen it. And so if you learn how to see the dynamic, it's almost like you're that person that like knew that the car accident was going to happen, and like you could like warn people and tell people that it was going to happen, like, and just like stay back and like be careful and all that stuff, but like they have to go through it themselves. And so there's a prophetic quality to it when you're the only person out of everybody that's waiting. But that's all I had to say about the shadow and the repressive and reactive nature.
Good points. I feel like with this gene key, the shadow and gift and city are all like so intertwined. They're all like the same side of the same coin, because in patience, it's the same word with just a little couple letters added in front of it. But with patience, my quotes are, you can wait both patiently or impatiently. Patience is about trust. These two words have very similar meanings. If you trust in life, you will trust life in every moment, even the challenging moments. And in doing so, you'll always remain in the flow. And I can vouch for that. And like, there's times where I would experience, I feel like for people with heavy melancholic energy or a lot of individual circuitry, you experience phases in which heaviness comes in, and the only way out is through, and you just have to wait for the energy to shift, because it naturally does. And so there's, I feel like there's this quality of, oh, it's nice to wait when you're enjoying the down moments, but like in the in-between moments, but when it's not as enjoyable, then impatience naturally sets in, because you don't want to be in the present moment. You don't want to experience the discomfort that you are experiencing in the now, even though there is value to it, because we keep saying the word pattern. If you think about pattern, it's like the infrastructure of life. There's like a woven sheet that covers everything, and everything has a place and a point and a time in which it's supposed to be. There's this interconnected fabric to everything, and you can't disrupt it. I mean, you can, but like you wouldn't want to disrupt it. You wouldn't want to like snag a thread and then interfere with the entirety of the fabric. But hindsight shows you repeatedly that life is constructed of beautiful and perfect patterns woven into wonderful tapestries, that your individual life follows such cosmic patterns. There we go. I didn't even realize I highlighted that. But yeah, hindsight helps. Like, you look back and you can see, oh yeah, I see, you see why you did what you did to avoid the car accident. You see why you were pulled into a certain flow. Your body was pulled into a certain place and time. for certain cosmic events to happen with or without you. There's a connectivity there. I think that's it for the gift on my end. I have more to talk about in the city, but do you have anything to say for the gift?
Yeah, it's actually funny because I highlighted that exact same quote because it's super important quote. And I'm trying to think. There's a couple things that I wanted to say, but the most important like quote that I had from this chapter, at least in this part of it, was that when you become impatient, even for a moment, you have stopped listening and trusting in the greater life. For these reasons, it is patience that has always been the true gauge and measure of the greatness of a person's soul. And I was like, ugh. I was like, okay, retrograde. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, okay, like touche. And like now I'm gonna try and be a lot more patient, right? Because if the greatness of my soul is on the line, definitely want to. But it makes sense because the reactive person is never going to be able to hold the same amount of wisdom as someone who is non-reactive. And again, like a lot of these things get like downloaded into our systems, the fear, the reactivity, the feeling like if we don't control something, then what we want to happen is not going to happen. The thought that what we want to happen is what's the most important thing to happen, right? All of that stuff, instead of trusting in the nature of life. And I think the quote that's like, you have to live life forward, but you can only understand it backward. It's like, if we could really like settle into that on a physical level, there would just be everyone would be in flow. But we don't realize these things until it's really close to, no matter how many people on their deathbed tell us this, we still have to like on some level learn it for ourselves. So that was kind of, I think, the only thing I wanted to talk about with the gift. But you can start, you can, if you want to go on your tangent and talk about timelessness.
I really like that quote you just shared. What was it again?
It was, when you become impatient, even for a moment, you have stopped listening and trusting.
It was a saying. The one that was like,
the one I shared, it was that life can only be lived forward, but understood backward.
Yeah. Do you know who says that? Who came up with that one?
No, but I'll find out while we're on the call, because it's definitely, these are like, I have like all of these random quotes in my head, and I'm like, I have no idea you said that, but like it's, yeah. You
usually do. You're usually good with like saying this person said this. I'm like, wow, there's so many things in your noggin. I want to say it's worth noting that Richard Rudd has the cross of consciousness, and so he has this gift or this gene key as part of his incarnation cross. I think he's born Virgo with his sun in 64, so I think this is his design sun. But no, it's not. It's one of the others. I don't know which one it is, but he has this in his incarnation cross. So like for him to say, oh yeah, it's part of your soul, I feel like it's, because he has it and he resonates with it.
Okay, fair enough, Richard Rudd. It's Søren Kierkegaard.
Okay, don't know who that is, but okay. I basically highlighted the whole city chapter. Before I get into quotes, I'll story tell. So when I was in, so first off, I had a conversation yesterday, and Sarah and I have right minds, right? We're variable arrows, and so like stuff gets pulled out of us, and we don't really know what's going to come out of our mouths. And so I started sending this person that I've never talked to really before a voice memo, and this analogy comes up, and so I do it, and it's, every day you wake up and you make so many minute little decisions, and you don't necessarily realize the consequence of those minute details, like what color shirt you're going to wear. You have a green shirt or a blue shirt, and so you pick one shirt to wear, and you don't realize that later that day you're going to come across a friend, and she's going to compliment that shirt, and then she's going to ask where you got it, and so you tell her, and then she goes to that place, and at that place she meets a certain person that ends up like totally like changing the tapestry of her own life. whether it's like, a career opportunity or the love of her life, or she, I don't know, goes and gets a lottery ticket next door and wins $1 jillion. We don't realize the consequence of like our little actions because we're just in the flow. Like the flow pulls us into these little moments. And so I was wondering where in all that lies, the idea that we have choice. Because like you don't even think about it. It's such a silly little question to think, do I want to wear the green shirt or the blue shirt? And you don't put much stock into it. And yet that choice has a ripple effect out into the world. And so what she was telling me is that, there's no choice in that. Like, even after you have the thought, there are an infinite amount of itty bitty moments that happen on a chemical and structural level that really like so much happens after each little thought that like you really have no choice in any of it. It was just a no choice human design conversation in a nutshell. And throughout this conversation, she brought up that she thinks that, our perception of life is that it's already been, it pertains to cosmology. If you're into cosmology and the human design perspective, Richard Rudd also talks about it, how like there's going to be a new earth that's being born, a new reality, a new consciousness. And like, we're not there yet. We're in this like interim state before we get there. And so our reality is not going to be that new reality, but it's coming. And we know it's coming. And so this person was saying that's already happened. It's already here. And so we're living life, like Sarah said, in hindsight. Like this is the understanding consciousness. The cross of consciousness is the understanding in hindsight of what it meant to be in this plane. And it sparked a memory that I had of, I have very few and far between memories of my childhood, but one was an epiphany I had when I was 10 years old in like 6th grade, learning about ancient civilizations. And so we were learning about ancient India and reincarnation and their religious beliefs. And because I was raised Catholic, I never had access to this idea of reincarnation before. And immediately, like in my cellular structure, I knew it to be true. But not only that, I knew that time wasn't linear. And back then I didn't have the vocabulary or the understanding to be able to explain my epiphany. But I knew that when you incarnate, you don't incarnate linearly in time. Like time in our perception of the human experience is subject to the human experience. And when you die, you're no longer human. You're not bound by the linearity of time. I mean, you go back into the linearity of time when you reincarnate, but outside of the human form, you're not bound to the linearity of time. And so you can reincarnate at any point in the time-space continuum. And I didn't understand the ramifications of that understanding when I was young. I was like, okay, yeah, in my next life, I'm going to reincarnate in the 1800s because I like the Renaissance. But like now thinking about that and thinking of what that means, everything exists and already has existed. And there is therefore no choice in all the minutiae of the little in-between moments that we think we have power over. Because if you're going to reincarnate into a person that has already existed in the past, and you're going to embody that life form, that person has already lived their life, and that life has already had the infinite amount of consequences, such as, green shirt, blue shirt, that have then, unfolded into the tapestry of life. It's like the tapestry of life has already been woven. It's not being woven. It exists, and we get plopped into it. And so it's heady to think about, because it really reinforces this idea that we have no choice. And then you ask, hey, why are we here? And it's for the self-reflected awareness to experience the life form, to experience the path and trajectory of life, and to think you have power over it, but you really don't, because there is no time. So I was like, go 10-year-old Lora, having this acidic epiphany with the gene key of timelessness, really understanding that time is a human concept that we use to understand, like navigate space-time reality is for us. And that really, it's a quality, it's a state of awareness. And like part of this gene key also is like, going to Disneyland, like when you're anticipating something, you can manipulate time. You can make it go faster or slower. You go to Disneyland and the ride there takes hours in your own mental experience, emotional experience of it as a child. But then as soon as you leave Disneyland, the ride home takes like 10-15 minutes. And you're like, wow, we're home already? Like the ride to going to wherever it is you're going takes such a long time because of the emotional chemistry that's happening in anticipation of whatever may or may not happen in the future. And yet there's this, fixed rigidity to whatever happens. So it's just like that, the power is within the emotions, within the internal chemistry of the consciousness. It's the cross of consciousness. Like, I don't have the cross of consciousness, but it is. Consciousness is to be plopped into these forms and to have the awareness and the chemical, brain hallucination of what's happening, and then to identify with it or not. But so I was thinking about that yesterday in conjunction with this Jinky. It's very fitting. But some of the quotes I have collected are like that. They also kind of are inspired or go hand in hand with the epiphany. Is life itself can be seen as waiting for death. We each wait for the future to reach into us, and as it does, so we see that what life has planned for us. Consciousness dances through our vehicles in unique archetypal patterns. Like the consciousness that we identify with as like, this is who I am. It's just here to experience the vehicle and then to enjoy the ride or not as it goes towards death, because death is, ultimately inevitable. It's what we're here to experience. We all have that destination. Our lives are like the candle flame flickering in the winds of duality, impatience to patience, fear to trust, and back again endlessly. Acidic state is different from this. In the acidic state, you have jumped out of the game. You are not identified with the candle flame, even though it may go on flickering. You cannot talk in terms of patience or impatience because you cannot talk of terms of time or identity. Timelessness is the nature of consciousness itself. It is unborn and undying. Timelessness does not care whether the body is exhibiting patience or impatience. It simply is. Timelessness is thus the death of all hiding. So there's more quotes, but just a last one. But Sarah, you can go ahead. I feel like I've hogged the mic for a while. I really like this Gene Key because I really like thinking about concepts of time, and it's like overwhelming because we identify with it so much, right? We identify with, what has happened, what we think may happen, and our place in a time-space continuum. Go ahead.
Yeah, 10-year-old Lora. I feel like me and you would have been, I feel like my 10-year-old self was also like deep in contemplation about the meaning of life. So I feel like we would have gotten along. So one thing I wanted to say, and it's not necessarily from the timelessness, the city aspect of it, but just that, Richard Rudd brings up the concept of love. And I think that we all get like so obsessive over the idea of falling in love because it's the closest thing that we ever get to timelessness, when we're not in awareness of like some of the higher working patterns that are all around us, and that we always have access to the sense of love within ourselves. It's like, if the best way for anybody who doesn't understand timelessness to understand it is when you've fallen in love. And like usually like when you're with the other person, it's almost like you're just completely in a time warp. Like it's everything is, time doesn't exist, and you understand like why everything happened the way that it happened so far. And like you're not mad at it at all. You're just like, okay, I get it. Like I get it now. And it's easy to be like that when you're happy, but it's also because basically like the state of open-heartedness is what taps us into our own sense of patience and our own sense of timelessness. And like you're most open-hearted when you're, staring into the eyes of somebody that you love, or that, that you see yourself reflected back into in a loving way. So I think that's important for anyone who wants to like kind of understand what the feeling is like. And I've definitely had moments with, just individually on my own where I felt that too. And so I understood that like, oh, this is why everyone obsesses over it, right? And I obsess over it too, not to act like I'm above that, but there is the quality of like, most of us, that's when we get access to it, even though we're always able to be tapped into it. And then, from the timelessness section, something he says is that what the shadow frequency views as a problem may actually be a higher genetic mutation waiting to be unlocked. And like my Pluto in the first house really likes this, because it's like, okay, like let's look at this as a game. Like if we're having a problem, it's like maybe that whatever is causing us this feeling of friction or this feeling of like thorn in our side, like it's like a higher level frequency that's waiting to be unlocked. We don't have to look at it like, this is wrong, this is right. It's like, oh, this is where I have some consciousness that needs to be cultivated. Like, thank you. Like, life is more exciting when there's like basically different levels that need to be unlocked, instead of just thinking that you're being victimized by it, right? And I had the same quote that you had. So I'm like, we're on the same rhythm this week. I really liked the idea of the future reaching into us, right? And I've always described, not always, but for a long time, I've described like feeling as though what it feels like to be alive is like you're in the middle of the past and the future, and you're getting pulled in both directions, and figuring out how to be present and open up the state of presence is like the trick. And it's also something that you have to cultivate. It's really hard to do, to cultivate the presence, because like at the end of the day, like the fabric that Lora was talking about that connects everybody, it's going to pull you. It's going to pull you forward. Like, you're going into the future one way or the other. It's like, how do we experience that pull forward though? And if we're present, we're able to cultivate that sense of presence. It's not as bumpy of a ride. It's not like you're screaming the entire way there. I mean, maybe there's a little screaming, but it's not quite to the same degree. And then just to follow that up with what he says is timelessness is thus the death of all fighting. And so I think, again, for my Pluto rising soul, it's like there's constantly a stormy battle being waged internally for me. And, you know, it feels a lot of times like life and death. It feels a lot of times like, if I don't think about this, if I don't do this, like if I don't act now, if I don't, you know, do something, like then all is lost, right? Like this very like dualistic, like reactionary behavior. And I've like just now, after post-Saturn return, been able to, you know, cultivate enough presence within meditation practices and other things in order to not just be reactionary and be pushy and be disrupting the flow of life. It's not to say that I'm perfect, because I'm actually like far more on the pushy end of the spectrum and the pessimistic end of the spectrum. Like, I think more than most people even are. Like, I think that, like, you know, starting square one, I started in a very like kind of maniacally controlling state. And so it was even more important for me to cultivate presence, because it's no way to live to be like that. So that's all I had for timelessness and for the city. Do you want to add anything before we move on to the astrology?
Yeah, because you said like we're in the present moment and we're being pulled from the past and into the future. There's like a memory circuit, all the gates that pertain to memory, and gate 5 is one of them, and it's the power or the life force to repeat memory. And it's like in this gate, in this constant flow of the repetition of patterns, like we can get caught up in the memory of, I guess, living in the past more so than the future, fixating on the patterns that have already transpired. And I think it's also really interesting with, gate 35 is not part of the memory circuit, but it's the programming partner, and it's hunger. It's like wanting experience, wanting to live life, wanting to like go to the extremes of like, not even extremes, but just like having experiencing something new. And it's that hunger for life. And so I feel like it's so contrastual to this gene key, which like in the acidic state is like, it's life, you know, you have hunger, but the hunger is a mechanism of you going along that trajectory that is your life. Like, I had an analogy for this path, which is like, you know, we're on a tightrope and we're walking this tightrope from birth to death, and we think, I can't fall off, like I can't make a mistake, like I have to get to certain experiences, like I have this destiny ahead of me, I have to live my purpose, I have to do all the things. And we imagine it as a tightrope walker of like, there's this tension here, and we're trying to navigate this line with so much finesse, right? Because like we don't want to fall off. Really, you know, Sarah was talking about how the way we experience timelessness is through love, and it reminds me of the magnetic monopole. Like, the magnetic monopole is timeless and it's connected to our design crystal, but as soon as we're incarnate in form, they separate. And so we have this longing for love because the magnetic monopole is love, and our consciousness, our design crystal, is now separate from it and wants to reconnect with that sensation of love, that energy of timelessness. And so we have this lifelong quest of like wanting to feel this reconnection. And anyways, so that was that. But like I bring up the magnetic monopole because like on this not trapeze, the tightrope of life, you can't fall off. Like you literally cannot fall off. It's like the magnetic monopole is like the most powerful magnet in the entire world, and the bottom of your feet are connected to it. And so the only way you can go is forward. And like you will go forward, and there's no other option other than to go forward. And you're moving in this flow. And yet we get so fearful of life, thinking that we're gonna do something wrong or we're not gonna get it. And so it's this hunger that pulls us forward on this tightrope of life, and this desire to re-experience the acidic state of, you know, magnetic monopole reconnecting to that design crystal. But really, like, it's there, it's part of us. You can't get rid of it. It's within you. But those are my only addendums for the acidic Ching key. But do you want to move on to
yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. That was a nice wrap up.
Okay. Do you want to get into it first with astrology?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I think that, you know, so I quote my teacher of traditional astrology, Adam Ellenboss, a lot, and I follow him and I watch his videos. He's like prolific. He's a generator. He doesn't like human design, but he has a lot of Capricorn moon. There you go. Is like very traditional astrology focused. But he had a video today about this particular full moon, and something that he reminded me of is that every Mars takes 2 years to circle the entire zodiac wheel, right? And the midpoint of its cycle can be looked at, or the full moon of its cycle can be looked at when it is opposing the sun. And so like Mars is going around, the sun obviously is going around. There's going to be a couple instances where there's going to be 2 instances where Mars opposes the sun throughout the 2-year period, give or take. And it's not going to be, I can't remember it's not as organized as Venus as far as the way that its synodic cycle works. But if we're thinking about this as not just being the full moon in Gemini, but also the full moon for Mars as a planet, then there's been a conjunction point that we can look back on, which happened in September or end of August of 2021. And then there was the first quarter square that happened between Mars, which happened in, I believe it was, the conjunction happened between Mars and the Sun in Libra in October of 2021. And then the first quarter square happened in, I think, the end of August, beginning of September of 2022. And so more or less, it's just like looking at, you know, not just the full moon, but also the beginning point, I think is important, that like that seeding moment. If this is the full moon, then that conjunction with Libra was the new moon. And so a new Mars sun cycle, you know, was seeded. And so something that he talked about was just like looking at not just the Gemini house, but also the Libra house, if you're looking at your own chart, to see like kind of like what is the greater pattern, or what are the themes that have been coming up that maybe started, like the martial, the independent, the self themes that maybe started around October of 2021. And like what about those things have been coming to a head. And so I've probably mentioned many times about how I'm Scorpio rising. I'm natally, I have Mars in Gemini, and this is my Mars return as well as just being Mars retrograde. And so for me, like this has been a really powerful energy to just like behold within myself. And I talked a lot last week about how, you know, when we look at Mars, we look about like how powerful like our words are, and like really being discerning with like how we communicate ourselves and how we whether or not, just because we're capable of like a bunch of stuff flowing out of our mouth quickly, like it doesn't mean that everyone is going to be able to hear it. And so the discernment that's required with Mars and Gemini, I think, is like one of the most important things, because it can create a lot of chaos and a lot of damage very quickly. Not to say that other Mars placements can't. It's just that, when it comes to like wounding with words, it's Mars and Gemini that's the most likely to do that. And so, for me, I've been becoming way more intentional about my words and things like that. And I feel like October of last year was like a really potent time for me to like start getting real about my own agency in my own life, and like understanding that like I no longer wanted to just act as if I was a victim to life, and start to see where it was that like in those tiny daily decisions that I was making, where I was creating chaos for myself that like was maybe unneeded or unnecessary. And, coming a year later, like so much has changed, so much has, so many things have been brought to my attention about myself and about my own way of relating. It's kind of, it's kind of overwhelming, to be honest with you. But I think for everyone, the collective, like, you're gonna have to look at where that, first of all, the Gemini house is in your chart. So like what's going on there? Do you have any planets there? And yeah, like, how active is that house regularly for you? And then also Libra, and see, where that house is, and see where those two houses might have some kind of interaction. For me, Libra is my 12th house and Mars is my 8th. And so it's like 12th house has to do with self-undoing. And so it was like, where am I undoing myself because I'm in some way getting involved in other people's emotional contracts, debts, things like that? And like, interestingly enough, it was September of last year, right before the new Mars cycle, that I ended 2 relationships that I was very invested in emotionally. So then coming full circle, it's interesting to see how things have changed so like drastically for me within relationships, and like how I'm just not nearly as willing and as I used to be to get into relationships before like everything, all of the parameters have been like looked at, and I've really been able to get like a better grasp on like where I'm going to have, or like where I'm really willing to create emotional commitments with people. That's kind of like an experiential approach. Laura, do you want to say anything that's like, I don't know. I mean, you can say experiential, but you can also say anything that's logical.
It's funny because I want to say experiential stuff.
And say experiential, go for it. This is our playground.
Huge point of like everything you just said. Like, so yeah, this full moon is like bringing illumination to this point in our charts, which is like 16 degrees Mars. I think it's worth noting that Venus's synodic cycles, because Venus was opposite Mars a couple days ago, or not a couple days ago, a week ago, but like 18 degrees Mars, or whenever it was, a week ago, I don't know time. But my point is that this point in Gemini is one of Venus's placements in her synodic cycles, where she also conjuncts the sun. So this little hot spot within Gemini, I think it's like 12 to 16 degrees Gemini, there's action here that's worth noting. And like Sarah said, the past synodic cycle for Mars began in Libra at 15 degrees, and the next one will begin in November. I like looked it up on my phone. It's November what? Where is it? Where'd it go? November 18th. At 25 degrees Scorpio. So this next one's going to begin in your first house. So I think that's worth noting, putting in the back of your head, Sarah, looking at the upcoming synodic cycle for Mars. But it's funny because like yesterday I had these ahas about myself that I didn't realize it was connected to Mars, and it totally is. Mars is important for both human design as well as your Venus sequence in Gene Keys. Both your Mars placements, your design and personality Mars, are in the Venus sequence, and Mars is also part of your prosperity sequence. your pearl sequence. And so I think it's personality Mars, that's your emotional quotient, and it's design Mars, that's your core wound. And I've been thinking about these two placements yesterday, totally forgetting that they're my Mars, just thinking about these gates that I have and how they show up in my human design, not really thinking anything about them in the gene key sense. But like, lo and behold, Mars is up front and prominent right now. And my awareness, my moon is bringing attention to it, or the moon currently is bringing attention to it. So for me, my core wound is 12.3, which is Mars in detriment. And it's an energy of self-loathing and self-criticism. And that 12, both my Marses are in my throat. My other Mars is in 56 and it's in the throat center, and it's that 1156 channel of abstraction, channel of storytelling. And so I notice that I really, really enjoy storytelling, and I do. And then the design Mars kicks in that self-loading, and it criticizes, like, should you really be telling this story? Is this story really important to tell right now? Like, aren't you done sharing another story, Laura? Like, gosh, get over yourself. Stop talking, stop talking. And yet the mechanics of 1156 are in action. And then I just keep storytelling. And I have this like back and forth criticism that's happening with like wanting to be recognized for who I am, and at the same time not having a lot of icky internal energy with actually letting me myself recognized for this thing. And it's like in Gemini, in my third house of communication, it's like so prominent. And like the beginning of this synodic cycle was in Libra, which is my 7th house, which deals with everyone, like all people, our relationships. So it's like super potent and accurate right now. So I suggest you look at your chart, do some exploring, look at your Mars placements, look at your relationship to Mars and how it shows up for you, because it is your emotional quotient and your core wound, like the thing that you feel like it's like your Chiron, like it constantly holds you back in life. And yeah, it can really expand your human experience if you surrender to it and embrace the shadow and let the gift unfold. But yeah, it's a lot. And so yeah, I'm feeling this full moon. I'm feeling it's there, it's noticeable, it's potent.
Well, and so interesting too, the other thing that Adam said was that this time frame right now is like, this is the most important, this is like marking this like the midpoint in the retrograde. Mars is retrograde, because like, of course, this isn't just a conjunction, Mars is also retrograde. There's a moon conjunction, it's not just a full moon. Mars is also retrograde. And so, there is absolutely like a very, very martial, and, having the 56 and then, or no, I'm sorry, having the 12 and the 56, just for me is very Gemini, it's like in the throat, like it's very like expressive. So it's just another, I don't know, it's been, this Mars retrograde has brought to my attention the fact that there's a certain level of my self-assertion that's going to always and inherently be involved with other people, that I cannot escape from it because it's in my 8th house. And no matter what I do, but like Laura said before, the most important thing is that I choose the people who I'm entangled with very, 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 very carefully. And even in human design, they say basically the only choice you have is like the type of people that are in your life, because you can stick around people who are like deep conditioning, or you can stick around people that are deeply conditioned, and like that's going to affect you. So just becoming aware of that has been kind of painful, but also really healing, because I have a lot of core wounds. The core wound, core wound for me is a different Mars placement because it's my design, but a lot of core wounding around, I guess my emotional quotient is in my Mars in Gemini. And so there's just been a lot of healing, I think, in regards to the way that I express myself emotionally. I've just seen myself mature so much with this Mars return, and also with this like kind of moment, because like, to be honest with you, it's a process. Oh, we lost Laura. We're gonna have to close up shop soon. It's a process to go from Oh man, I feel like now that I've lost Laura,
Sorry, keep talking while I try to bring the camera back.
It's a process to go from an immature Mars in Gemini to a mature Mars in Gemini. And it's just been, really tiring and also rewarding. And it's a process for the Mars cycle in general. So like, we're not always, just because we're having a full moon, it's like, it's a punctuation, it's an exclamation, it's not the entirety of the sentence. So the sentence is something that's been ongoing, that's been building, right, over the course of weeks, months, however, it's constantly, it's a cycle. So it's constantly building upon itself. But this moment is like a moment of punctuation for it. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to say about the Mars retrograde. I think important for us to note is by the time we're on call next week, we're going to have Venus entering Capricorn, Mercury already entered Capricorn. And then basically we can cover both of those things next week. And Jupiter, it's not going to happen next week. Never mind. So yeah, those two things, we're shifting from Sagittarian energy to Capricorn energy, which is, interesting and maybe potentially good for us to get some cardinal energy in the game. Laura, I know that you're back on video. Is there anything you want to say before we close up shop here?
I totally forgot. I feel like Mercury is relevant to look at because it's the ruler of Gemini and now it's in Capricorn and, doing its thing. So sorry, Mercury, forgot about you, but it's in gate 10 right now, which is the gate of the love of the self. It deals with, accepting all of the different ways that humans show up as humans and embracing differentiation, really. And, it's melancholic. Hello, melancholy. It's melancholic about people not behaving the way you want them to behave, which I think is a really interesting placement for Mercury during the holidays. Actually, let me look at how long it's going to be there, because I feel like it probably won't be there for very long. Mercury moves fairly quickly, but it's probably not a nice energy for the holidays with family members and seeing people that you see during this time of year and getting frustrated with how they're behaving. Let me just quickly look at it. I think it's fairly short, but until the 9th. So yeah, only a couple more days, but then Venus will move there. So we'll have more of it. But yeah, for the most part, that's what we're going to be experiencing. Yep.
I knew that we were going to have some technical issues with this full moon. Like I had no doubt. I wasn't planning on this going perfectly. So Laura's video camera died, my computer's dying. There's all kinds of Mars retrograde shenanigans going on here, full moon, etc. But I think that's a good wrap up, a good place to stop. We have definitely exercised our voices. It's been about an hour and a half, I think, for this particular key and what's going on right now. And I think it's important. So I'm glad we took some time with it. Like I said at the very beginning, if we resonate with you, if this podcast or / YouTube channel is something that you enjoy, you're interested in human design, gene keys, and astrology, and you're on our fractal, please like and subscribe and comment if there's anything that you want to hear, listen to, talk about. And we also do reading, so check beneath the video to see our contact info. Laura, do you want to say anything before we close down?
You can just find our personal info in the box below, but that's basically it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. If you stuck around to the end, a lot of you leave at the 5-minute mark, but if you're one of those people, you wouldn't be hearing this judgment of you, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, thanks for listening. We appreciate you. Yeah, that's it. Have a good week. Have a good full moon. Have a good Mars opposition sun channel thing going on for you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.